Hey, I'm Kip and welcome back to my Artfight 2025. My fourth attack this year was on Astro Lulani's character Carnation. Not gonna lie, for the longest time I confused Carnation with Carnage and thought this flower just had a badass name. But yeah, Carnation here used to be human, but got turned into a violent plant through lab experiments. When I looked at him, I thought, this would look sick as a video game opponent. So I went back to using a sprite again. If this was client work and not just for fun, I would have taken some time to do research on old games. That could have given me a better idea of how to approach this. By using a reference, I might have learned something new, picked up some new cool tricks. The fun part about references is analyzing them, what works and what doesn't, and finding out what speaks to me specifically. I like to dig out those little nuggets of data I can use in my own stuff. But that's not what I did this time. Instead, I mostly vibed it out. I had the game Vampire Survivors a little bit in the back of my mind, mostly because that's what I've been playing recently. In-game, the characters have way less resolution than Carnation here, but the vibe I get from the game is kind of dark and raw. So I wanted to use a lot of contrast, and try to create something a bit heavy on the atmosphere. I wasn't quite sure what Carnation is capable of, but I thought it would be cool if his body is largely underground, and what we see here is only the flower. It feels a lot more threatening to me if most of your opponent is obscured. To imply this, I tried making it seem like the arm mines and the body go underground, and stick up all around the place. I don't know if I succeeded, you tell me. Either way, it was very fun to draw the squiggly, crooked shapes, especially the ones in the back. I think they also added a little more sense of space into the scene. It's a pretty vague location, but I think that adds to the eeriness of it all. Almost like a dream. No specific time or place you can pin down really. You're just sort of there in the unknown. I have been trying to be more brave with the use of black and silhouettes lately, which lent itself well to this piece, I think. I also added his name as if you're being introduced to him for the first time in-game or something. Looking at it in hindsight, I could have had a bigger contrast in the values to make Carnation stand out more from the background. I could have given the head a bit more dimension too. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the atmosphere in this one. Alright, next one up is Peaches by Dummy Peaches. Listen, this project was such a crazy task I made for myself. This will be quick, I said. It'll be fun. And it was, but it wasn't nearly as quick as I expected it to be. Partly because I haven't used Blender in a while, and also because I'm delusional. In the end, this became the piece I spent the most hours on, about 4. It's also one of 2 that I didn't finish in one sitting. It didn't help that Blender kept crashing. Pretty much everything went wrong along the way here. Fair warning, I would take anything I say here with a big grain of salt because I'm no Blender wizard. My vision for this was a quick 3D sculpt where I could just paint directly onto the object. The idea was to only see it from one angle, so it only had to look good from that one perspective, which is why I started messing with the placement of forms down the line. This whole project was me trying to get away with shortcuts and bullshit, and it taught me that trying to be too quick and lazy with things is probably just gonna mean more work and time spent in total. Very valuable lesson. Not one you would think is necessary to learn firsthand, so don't take it from me. Make your own damn mistakes. On that note, I made it extra hard for myself by just jumping straight into Blender without a solid reference. Usually I would make a front and a side view, so I know exactly what I'm going for. I can spend a lot of time noodling around if there's no specific technical goal in mind. But yeah. Speaking of technical, to achieve the kind of cartoony look, I had to go into the materials of the object and make it so they wouldn't be affected by the lighting within the scene. I had to do this for every shape I wanted to paint. I'm sure there's a clever way to apply this setting to all the different materials at once, but that's a discovery for another day. Once I started painting, you might see that the colors got all messed up and kind of pixelated. That's certainly a look, but not the one I was going for. I wanted a smooth canvas to paint on, and so I had to mess around to figure out what was wrong. Turns out the mesh itself was on too low of a resolution, so I used something called remesh. This is kind of a messy way to alter the mesh to give it more or less polygons, as in higher or lower resolution. But then again, this is not made to be an optimized game asset, it's purely a visual, so the poly count and the structure of the polygons doesn't really matter here. Something I've learned about 3D is that there isn't necessarily a right and a wrong way to do something, you just need the thing to function for your specific purpose. Much like art in general, in my opinion. By the time I got to the end, Artfight was almost over, and my brain was cooked, dude. I quickly slapped some bones onto one of her pigtails in order to do some light animation, and I just, no, not happening. So I left that pursuit behind and focused on finishing what was already there. For some reason, I couldn't get to the eyebrows and the sweater strings on time, but that's okay. It's just how it turned out this time. So that was Peaches. Lastly, we have Clarson by Amukruk. During the making of this video, I received a comment by the artist. Saying it's good enough was a real challenge for me this art fight. I felt if I'm always going to allow myself to leave my art half done, I'll end up stuck with the same skill level. I want to talk a bit about that. Most of the time, I don't take stuff to completion. I was taught many years ago that when it comes to learning specifically, it's iteration over detail. For example, instead of constructing and rendering one hand to perfection, I will learn a lot more about drawing hands if I just sketch out 10 different ones in that same amount of time. Finishing stuff, so to speak, is nice to test my current skill level, but it's not necessary for every piece. Most of my stuff is sketches actually. Getting better at drawing isn't just about putting the pencil to the paper either, it's a lot about observing. To observe consciously and with intent will let you pick up a lot of knowledge without having to even touch a pencil. Of course, drawing a lot is important too, but it helps me to remember that drawing is a tool to convey our understanding of the world. So back to the drawing. I want to talk about the good enoughs of this one. Spoiler, there is a lot of them. I'm not gonna talk the pieces down or anything, but I do have a point to make in the end. So first off, the weakest part of this illustration also happens to be my favorite. This tree, and I'll tell you why. I absolutely love the shapes and the values. The total blackout is giving the appearance of really strong direct sunlight. I also really like the color of the highlighted areas once I made it brighter, closer to yellow and more saturated. There's more, but let me tell you why this tree doesn't work here. It's totally stealing the spotlight from Clarson, the real focal point. I think perhaps the biggest contributor to this is the values. I happen to put the darkest values against the brightest one, the sky, so when you have this point of stark contrast, your eyes automatically gets drawn to that area. This would be great if it was in the center with Clarson, but of course it's up to the side with lines leading out of the picture on top of that. It also feels like it's tangenting with the foreground tree. This could have been fixed if the composition had separated them and maybe made the spiky tree lesser in contrast. Same with the bushes below. I think I could have been more deliberate with the shape of the black silhouettes as well. I could go on. But my point is, I love this drawing a lot. Not despite its mistakes, but because of them. If I hadn't messed up on so many points, the lessons might not have been as apparent and not stuck as much. But now they do. As a final note, I just want to say that leaving things half done doesn't mean you'll never improve. There are cases where artists complete hundreds of drawings but never change their approach, and so the results stay more or less the same. Totally valid if that's what you enjoy, of course. Art is whatever you need it to be. But if you do want to improve, I think it just comes down to how aware you are and how deliberate you are in your approach. I hope that makes sense. And with that, I'll stop yapping. That's it for part 2. Thank you to the artists for sending me their lovely characters, and thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to stick around and catch the next one. Okay, bye!